the 14th of June, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. The morning mist clung to the ancient Norman hedgerows like a burial shroud, diffusing the pale sunlight into something gray and uncertain. Sergeant Michael Kovacs of the 2nd Armored Division's 3rd Platoon crouched beside his M4A1 Sherman, listening to the diesel engine tick as it cooled. In his hands, he held a crumpled cigarette and a piece of advice that would have gotten him laughed out of Fort Knox 6 months earlier. The note, passed down from a lieutenant who'd survived the initial breakout from Omaha Beach, contained 3 words scrawled in pencil: "Load feet first." Kovacs looked at the turret hatch above him, a circular opening barely 26 inches in diameter, and tried to imagine entering it backwards, feet leading the way into the cramped steel womb of the fighting compartment. It violated every principle of armored warfare doctrine he'd learned. It contradicted the technical manuals. It defied common sense. And yet, somewhere in the chaotic mathematics of survival that defined the Normandy campaign, this absurd maneuver had become something approaching gospel among veteran Sherman crews. The Germans, meanwhile, were supremely confident. Their Panzer crews, particularly those commanding the fearsome Panzerkampfwagen the 6th, Tiger I, and Tiger II, openly mocked the American M4 Sherman. They called it the Tommy Cooker, a reference to the British cigarette lighter and the Sherman's unfortunate tendency to brew up into flames when penetrated. German tank commanders gathered in mess tents and training facilities throughout occupied France, trading stories of their technical superiority with the casual arrogance of men who knew their equipment represented the pinnacle of armored engineering. And they had reason for confidence. The Tiger I, first deployed in 1942, mounted the devastating 8.8 centimeters Quag 36 liters divided by 56 gun, a weapon capable of penetrating 110 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. Its own frontal armor measured 100 millimeters thick, sloped at angles that could deflect all but the most fortunate Sherman shots. The Tiger II, beginning to appear in Normandy by late June, was even more formidable. 150 millimeters of frontal armor, and the long-barreled 8.8 centimeters Cork 43 liters divided by 71, which could punch through 182 millimeters of steel at the same distance. The Sherman, by comparison, seemed almost comically outmatched. Its M3 75 millimeters gun could barely scratch a Tiger's frontal armor at anything beyond point-blank range. At 400 meters a distance, a Tiger could engage with near impunity. A Sherman's standard M61 armor-piercing round would simply spark off the German tank's glacis plate like a stone skipped across water. The Sherman's own armor, a mere 76 millimeters at its thickest point and often less, offered little protection against the Tiger's devastating main gun. But there was one specification that appeared in no technical manual, no engineering schematic, no after-action report from the Waffenamt or the Ordnance Department. It was a human factor, as invisible as it was decisive: the rate of fire under actual combat conditions. The official German loading procedure for the Tiger I was a masterpiece of Teutonic precision. The loader, positioned on the right side of the gun breech, would retrieve a 2-piece 8.8 centimeters round from the meticulously organized ammunition storage bins. First, he would load the approximately 22-pound projectile into the breech, ramming it home with a mechanical loader assist. Then, he would insert the brass cartridge case containing the propellant charge. The gunner would confirm loading. The commander would authorize fire, and only then would the gunner complete his firing sequence. Under ideal conditions at a training ground, with a stationary target and no incoming fire, a veteran Tiger crew could achieve a reload cycle of approximately 9 to 10 seconds. Under combat conditions, that number told a very different story. The Tiger's fighting compartment, though more spacious than the Sherman's, became a chaos of hot brass, cordite smoke, and adrenaline. The 2-piece ammunition system, while allowing for variable charges and greater flexibility, introduced additional steps and additional opportunities for error. Worse, the Tiger's turret traverse mechanism, while more powerful than the Sherman's, was also slower. A full 360-degree rotation took approximately 60 seconds via hand crank, or 36 seconds, using the hydraulic drive at full engine RPM. In the close-quarters warfare of the Norman Bocage, where engagements often occurred at ranges under 200 meters, and required rapid target acquisition. These seconds became eternities. The Sherman's official loading procedure was simpler by necessity. The M4's 75mm rounds were single-piece, fixed ammunition projectile, and propellant case manufactured as a single unit. The loader, stationed on the left side of the breech, would pull around from the ready rack, swing it into alignment, and ram it home with a single fluid motion. The gunner would close the breech with a slap of his hand, confirm the firing circuit, and squeeze the trigger. Official U.S. Army doctrine stated that a trained crew should achieve approximately 5 to 6 rounds per minute, a reload cycle of 10 to 12 seconds. In practice, most Sherman crews in Normandy were achieving something closer to 15 to 18 seconds per shot. The cramped fighting compartment, measuring roughly 82 inches in diameter at its widest point, meant loaders were constantly fighting for position. The vertical spring-loaded ammunition racks, while theoretically efficient, required the loader to twist his entire body between shots. Spent shell casings would clatter across the turret basket floor, creating trip hazards. The gun's recoil would send the breech careening backward, forcing the loader to time his movements precisely or risk a crushed hand or broken arm. And then, there was the fundamental problem of the hatch. Standard procedure called for the loader to enter the turret through the commander's cupola, or the loader's hatch, head first, feet following. Once inside, he would orient himself within the familiar geometry of the fighting compartment. Ammunition racks here, fire extinguisher there, breech mechanism in the center, ready rounds arranged according to type and priority. It was logical. It was orthodox. It was what every tanker learned at Fort Knox, Fort Benning, and every armored training facility from Texas to California. No one quite knows who first suggested entering the turret backwards. Some accounts credit a tank commander named Lieutenant James Bates, 3rd Armored Division, who allegedly observed that crews mounting in conventional fashion wasted precious seconds orienting themselves in the confined space. Others point to an unnamed sergeant in the 2nd Armored who'd served as a loader on 4 different Shermans, the first 3 of which had been destroyed beneath him. What is documented is that by late June 1944, multiple Sherman platoons operating in the hedgerow country south of Carrington had independently adopted the same bizarre technique. The method was simple in concept, fiendishly uncomfortable in execution. As the crew mounted the tank, the loader would position himself at his hatch feet first, dangling his legs into the turret. He would then slide backward through the opening, a 26-inch circle that seemed designed to reject the human form, lowering himself into the fighting compartment in a controlled fall. His feet would find the turret basket floor first. His hands would grip the hatch rim, controlling his descent. And crucially, as he dropped into position, he would find himself already facing the ammunition ready rack, his body pre-oriented for the loading motion. The first few attempts were, by all accounts, disasters of improvisation. Loaders caught their equipment on hatch edges. They misjudged the drop and landed awkwardly, twisting ankles or bruising ribs. They banged their heads on the gun breech as they descended. Commanders watched these early experiments with expressions that ranged from bemusement to outright alarm. But something remarkable began to emerge from this ungainly choreography. Loaders entering feet first weren't just oriented faster, they were positioned in a state of preloaded kinetic readiness. Their legs, descending first, naturally placed their center of gravity lower in the turret. Their arms, gripping the hatch edge during descent, transitioned smoothly to gripping the breech handle or ammunition rack. The mental reorientation that consumed precious seconds in conventional mounting, the moment of, "Where am I? Where's my gun? Where's my ammunition?" simply vanished. On the firing range at an improvised training ground near Isigny-sur-Mer, Lieutenant Colonel William Harrison of the 2nd Armored Division's 67th Armored Regiment decided to test the technique under controlled conditions. He selected 2 veteran Sherman crews, both with combat experience, and ran a series of time trials. The first crew would mount and load using conventional head-first entry. The second would use the backwards method. The results were stunning. Conventional mounting, average time from dismounted to first shot ready, 28 seconds. Feet, first mounting, 16 seconds. But it was the sustained rate of fire that truly revealed the technique's value. The crew using backwards entry maintained an average reload cycle of 12 to 14 seconds across 15 consecutive rounds. The conventional crew, fighting the cramped geometry and spatial disorientation, averaged 22 to 25 seconds, nearly double the time. Harrison, a career armor officer who'd cut his teeth on the M3 Lee in North Africa, understood immediately what he was seeing. In a one-on-one duel with a Tiger, the Sherman was still hopelessly outgunned. But in the chaotic close-quarters engagements that characterized bow-cage fighting, where German armor would appear suddenly at intersections, where multiple Shermans could mass fire on single targets, where the first shot rarely killed but the fourth or fifth might find a weak point that doubled rate of fire transformed the tactical calculus entirely. The technique spread through the armored divisions in Normandy, not through official channels but through the informal network of veteran crews sharing survival strategies over evening rations and cigarette breaks. A sergeant from the 2nd Armored would mention it to a corporal from the 3rd Armored during a resupply operation. A lieutenant would observe another platoon's unusual mounting procedure and quiz their commander. Tank recovery crews, moving between units to repair and redistribute damaged vehicles, carried the knowledge like a virus of tactical innovation. By early July 1944, entire companies within the American armored divisions were training their replacement crews in the feet-first method before they ever saw combat. The technique remained unofficial, no training manual was revised. No formal doctrine emerged, but it had achieved something perhaps more powerful: battlefield consensus. The 19th of July 1944, southeast of St. Lo, Normandy, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen's platoon of 5M4A1 Shermans occupied a concealed position in a sunken lane, bordered by hedgerows 12 feet high. The bocage terrain, agricultural land, divided by ancient earthen barriers, topped with impenetrable thornbush and trees, had transformed Normandy into a nightmarish maze where visibility rarely exceeded 50 yards, and ambush was the rule, rather than exception. Chen's radio crackled with the clipped voice of his platoon leader. Movement: northeast quadrant. Range estimated 200 yards. Probable armor. Through the narrow viewport of his commander's cupola, Chen caught a flash of dark gray paint through a gap in the hedgerow. The distinctive boxy silhouette was unmistakable. Tigers, at least 2 of them, possibly more, advancing south along a parallel farm track. The German tanks were hunting, moving with the cautious aggression of predators who knew they dominated this environment. Standard doctrine called for Sherman platoons to avoid direct engagement with Tigers whenever possible. The 75mm gun simply lacked the penetrating power to reliably damage a Tiger from the front at these ranges. The official recommendation was to radio for air support, withdraw, or attempt to maneuver for flank shots where the Tiger's thinner side armor might be vulnerable. Chen made a different calculation. His platoon occupied superior concealed positions. The terrain channeled the German advance into predictable avenues, and his crews, all veterans, all trained in the feet-first loading technique, could sustain a rate of fire that might overwhelm even the Tiger's formidable armor through sheer volume. All units, hold position. Prepare to engage on my mark. Target priority, lead vehicle, concentrate fire. The Tigers continued their advance, their commanders likely scanning for movement, expecting the Americans to either flee or die. They were perhaps 200 meters away when Chen gave the order. Fire. 5 75mm guns spoke nearly simultaneously. The reports merged into a single thunderous crack that echoed across the bocage. The lead Tiger shuddered as multiple rounds impacted its frontal armor. Sparks flew. Armor-piercing rounds ricocheted into the sky like meteors flying backward. The Tiger's thick hide absorbed the punishment with contemptuous ease. But Chen's gunner was already reloading. Across the platoon, 5 loaders executed their bizarre backwards ballet with practiced precision. 12 seconds after the first volley, 5 more rounds hammered into the German armor. Then 12 seconds after that, 5 more. The mathematics of massed fire began to work their inexorable logic. A Sherman's 75mm round couldn't reliably penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor, but reliably is not the same as never. Armor plates, seemingly impenetrable, contain microscopic flaws, weak spots where welds meet, slight variations in hardness, areas stressed by previous impacts. Each strike increased the probability that the next round might find that critical weakness. 18 seconds into the engagement, one of the German tanks began to traverse its turret, seeking targets. But before its massive 8.8 centimeters gun could align, another volley struck home. This time, a 75 millimeters round found the junction between the turret ring and hull, a vulnerable transition point in any tank design. The round didn't fully penetrate, but it jammed the turret traverse mechanism, leaving the Tiger unable to bring its main gun to bear. The German tank commander, unable to fight, did the only rational thing. He attempted to reverse. But the bocage terrain, so confining for the Americans, proved equally treacherous for the Germans. The Tiger, backing blind through a narrow farm track, crashed through a hedgerow and dropped its right track into a drainage ditch. The massive tank settled at a 15-degree angle, effectively immobilized. 24 seconds into the engagement, Chen's platoon fired their third concentrated volley. The immobilized Tiger, its frontal armor now presenting at a slight angle due to the tilt, offered a fractionally more vulnerable profile. A round from Chen's own gunner struck the lower glacis plate, where it met the hull, a shot that, by all reasonable probability, should have bounced. Instead, the round found a microscopic stress fracture, the legacy of some earlier combat damage or manufacturing imperfection. The shell penetrated. Inside the Tiger, the result was catastrophic. The armor-piercing round, its penetrating cap intact, sliced through the tank's transmission housing and ignited the hydraulic fluid reservoir. Fire bloomed instantly in the crew compartment. Within seconds, the 5-man crew was bailing out through every available hatch, abandoning the burning hulk of their supposedly invincible machine. The second Tiger, witnessing its companion's destruction, made the tactical decision that would doom it. Rather than reversing, which would have been prudent but slow, the German commander ordered his driver to accelerate forward, attempting to punch through the American position and engage at point-blank range, where the Tiger's armor advantage would be absolute. It was a sound tactical gambit that might have succeeded against a conventional Sherman platoon. But Chen's crews were operating at a tempo the German commander couldn't match. As the Tiger surged forward, all 5 American tanks shifted fire to the new threat. The German tank ate round after round as it charged, each impact sending shockwaves through its hull, each strike testing its armor's integrity. At 150 meters, the Tiger's commander finally brought his main gun to bear. The 8.8 centimeters weapon spoke once a deep, authoritative boom that seemed to compress the air itself. One of Chen's Shermans erupted in flames, its thinner armor no match for the German gun's penetrating power. But in the seconds required for the Tiger's loader to go through his 2-piece loading sequence, Chen's remaining 4 tanks fired again. And then again, and again. The Tiger's advance faltered. Its right front track, stressed by multiple near misses and glancing hits, suddenly snapped and began to peel away from its road wheels. The massive tank slewed sideways, exposing its more vulnerable side armor. Chen's gunner, operating with the cold precision of a man who'd survived 6 weeks of continuous combat, placed a round through the Tiger's side skirt and into the thinner flank armor beneath. This time, the penetration was clean and devastating. The round pierced the Tiger's fighting compartment, igniting ammunition stored in the hull. The explosion that followed blew the Tiger's turret completely off its mount, sending it careening sideways to land upside down 15 feet from the shattered hull. But the engagement wasn't over. Through the smoke and dust, Chen spotted movement. 3 more German tanks, these bearing the distinctive profiles of Panzer force rather than Tigers. The Panzer IV, while more numerous and far less formidable than the Tiger, still mounted a capable 7.5 centimeters gun and frontal armor sufficient to shrug off most Sherman rounds at range. The German tanks, however, were advancing directly into a killing ground, already mapped and ranged by Chen's crews. What followed was less a battle than an execution. Chen's 4 surviving Shermans, each loader working with the mechanical precision born of practice and desperation, poured fire into the approaching armor. Their sustained rate, 1 round every 12 to 14 seconds per tank, created a nearly continuous stream of incoming fire that the German crews simply couldn't match. The first Panzer IV died, with 3 rounds through its turret. The second lost its track to a lucky shot and was subsequently destroyed by concentrated fire to its exposed side. The third, seeing the fate of its companions, attempted to withdraw, but became entangled in a hedgerow and was set ablaze by multiple hits to its engine compartment. When the firing finally ceased, 43 minutes after Chen had given his initial fire order, 9 German tanks lay destroyed or abandoned in a corridor of devastated farmland, roughly 400 meters long. Chen's platoon had fired an estimated 187 rounds of 75mm ammunition. They had sustained the loss of 1 Sherman killed by the Tiger's single, devastating shot and damage to 2 others that would require field repairs. In the formal after-action report, Chen attributed the success to superior positioning, effective use of terrain, and aggressive fire discipline. He made no mention of the feet-first loading technique. It wasn't that he was hiding anything, it simply didn't occur to him that the method was noteworthy. By late July 1944, entering a Sherman turret feet first had become as natural to veteran crews as breathing. The German response to these engagements was telling. Panzer commanders, accustomed to technical superiority and individual prowess deciding armored engagements, found themselves increasingly frustrated by American tactics that emphasized coordination, volume of fire, and rapid engagement cycles. German after-action reports from Normandy frequently noted the unexpected aggressiveness and sustained fire rate of American armor, though the reports attributed this to unknown factors, perhaps better ammunition handling procedures or more efficient ready-rack arrangements. They never discovered the simple truth. American tankers were entering their turrets backwards. The technique's true genius lay not in any complex technical innovation, but in its elegant solution to a human factors problem that had plagued armored warfare since tanks first rumbled across the Somme in 1916. Tank designers, then and now, focused obsessively on armor thickness, gun penetration, engine horsepower, and mechanical reliability. These were measurable, quantifiable attributes that could be tested on proving grounds and compared in technical specifications. But the speed at which a frightened 19-year-old loader could retrieve, orient, and load a 20-pound shell while crammed into a steel box filled with smoke, noise, and the very real possibility of imminent death, that wasn't in any technical manual. The half-second saved by pre-orienting a loader's body position, the reduction in cognitive load from eliminating spatial reorientation, the accumulated advantage of hundreds of these micro-optimizations across dozens of combat engagements, those were variables that existed in the unmapped territory between engineering and human performance. The feet-first technique represented something that military organizations with their emphasis on doctrine, standardization, and top-down control often struggled to generate: bottom-up tactical innovation born from the desperate ingenuity of men trying to survive. It emerged not from the Ordnance Department or the Armor School at Fort Knox, but from the collective intelligence of crews who understood, with the crystal clarity that comes from being shot at, that they needed every possible advantage. By August 1944, as the Normandy breakout accelerated into Operation Cobra and the subsequent pursuit across France, the technique had become so widespread that replacement crews arriving from the States would sometimes report encountering it during their final training exercises at embarkation camps. Veteran NCOs, rotated back for instructor duty, would demonstrate the method informally, usually with some variation of, "I know it looks stupid, but just try it." Official recognition came slowly, filtered through layers of military bureaucracy suspicious of any deviation from approved doctrine. It wasn't until late 1944 that some training manuals began to include oblique references to alternative mounting procedures that might enhance crew efficiency. Even then, the descriptions were vague enough to avoid explicitly contradicting earlier approved techniques. The impact on crew survivability is difficult to quantify precisely, buried as it is within the larger statistical noise of armored combat. But certain data points are suggestive. Sherman platoons trained in the feet-first method demonstrated measurably higher survival rates in close-range engagements against superior German armor. When matched against the lethality data showing that Sherman crews faced approximately 60–70% casualty rates when engaging Tigers at ranges under 300 meters, the appearance of tactical innovations that doubled sustained fire rates corresponds with a notable improvement in those odds. There is a broader lesson here, one that transcends the specific tactical circumstances of 1944 Normandy. Military history tends to focus on the grand strategic decisions, the movements of armies, the clash of doctrines and technologies. We remember Patton's sweeping advances and Rommel's tactical brilliance. We study the engineering specifications of Tigers and Shermans, comparing armor thickness and gun penetration as though these numbers told the complete story. But wars are not won by specifications. They are won by 19-year-old farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Detroit who, confronted with a problem that might kill them, figure out that entering a turret feet first saves 12 seconds, and that 12 seconds might mean the difference between firing twice and never firing again. The feet-first loading technique survived the war in an attenuated form. Post-war Sherman crews, facing less desperate circumstances, often reverted to conventional mounting procedures. The technique appears sporadically in Korean War accounts, usually associated with veteran crews who'd served in Europe. By Vietnam, where armored warfare looked fundamentally different, the method had largely faded from practice. But its legacy persists, in a less tangible form, in the recognition that tactical innovation often emerges from the bottom up, from the men and women closest to the problem. Modern military organizations, at their best, try to create systems that capture and disseminate these innovations rather than suppress them. After-action reviews, lessons learned databases, and rapid dissemination protocols all represent institutional attempts to replicate what happened informally in Normandy. The viral spread of life-saving techniques through the organic network of warriors talking to warriors. Sergeant Michael Kovacs survived the war. He returned to Cleveland, Ohio, worked 32 years at a steel mill, raised 3 children, and rarely spoke about his time in Sherman tanks. When he did, usually prompted by grandchildren fascinated by his Medal of Valor, he would describe the mechanical details, the smell of cordite, the confined spaces, the constant noise. He would mention, almost as an aside, that his crew had developed an unusual way of entering the turret. "Sounds stupid," he would say, "going in backwards like that, but it worked." In the end, that might be the most fitting epitaph for one of the war's strangest tactical innovations. It sounded stupid, but it worked. In the brutal arithmetic of armored combat, where success is measured in the seconds between life and death, that was enough.